Sophie Bennett was 6 years old when the headaches started. At first, her parents thought it was just stress from school or too much screen time. But when Sophie began vomiting every morning and stumbling when she walked, they knew something was terribly wrong. The MRI results came back on a cold November afternoon. Dr. Patricia Morrison sat across from Sophie's parents, Thomas and Elena, in her office at Children's Hospital in Boston. The walls were covered with drawings from patients, bright crayon scribbles of hope that now felt like cruel mockery. "It's a glioblastoma," Dr. Morrison said quietly. "An aggressive brain tumor. It's located in an area we can't operate on without causing severe damage." Elena's hand found Thomas's and squeezed until her knuckles turned white. "What are you saying? With chemotherapy and radiation, we can try to slow its growth. But I need to be honest with you. This type of tumor in this location in a child this young, the prognosis is not good." Thomas's voice was barely a whisper. "How long?" "6 months. Maybe a year if the treatment works better than we hope." The room tilted. Elena heard a sound like an animal in pain and realized it was coming from her own throat. Sophie started treatment the following week. The chemotherapy made her beautiful blonde hair fall out in clumps. The radiation left burn marks on her scalp. She lost weight, her cheeks hollowing out, her eyes seeming too large for her small face. But what hurt Elena and Thomas the most was watching their daughter's spirit dim. Sophie had always been bright, energetic, full of questions and laughter. Now she was quiet, moving through her days with a weariness no 6-year-old should know. It was early December when Sophie first mentioned the Virgin Mary. They were sitting together on Sophie's bed reading her favorite book about a girl who could talk to animals. Sophie interrupted suddenly. "Mama, do you think the Virgin Mary is real?" Elena looked at her daughter, surprised. They weren't particularly religious. They went to church maybe twice a year on Christmas and Easter. "Why do you ask, sweetheart?" "I saw a picture of her at the hospital. She looked kind, like someone who would listen." Elena felt tears burn behind her eyes. "I think she's real, yes. And I think she listens to people who need her." Sophie nodded seriously. "I want to see her." "You mean like in church? We can go whenever you want." "No." Sophie shook her head. "I want to see her. Really see her, like people in the stories do." Elena didn't know what to say to that. She pulled Sophie close, breathing in the smell of hospital soap and the faint chemical scent that clung to her daughter's skin now. "Maybe you will, baby. Maybe you will." Outside the window, the first snow of winter began to fall. Christmas lights blinked on houses up and down their street in suburban Newton. Families were preparing for holidays, for joy, for celebration. Inside, Elena and Thomas were preparing to say goodbye to their only child. The doctors had given them 6 months. They would get 5. December crawled forward with agonizing slowness. The chemotherapy wasn't working. The tumor was growing despite everything Dr. Morrison tried. Sophie's headaches became so severe that she would cry for hours, her small body curled in pain that medication could barely touch. 3 weeks before Christmas, Dr. Morrison called them into her office again. Sophie was having a good day, playing in the hospital playroom with a volunteer. It was one of her last good days. "The tumor has doubled in size," Dr. Morrison said, her professional composure cracking slightly. "We're not seeing any response to treatment. At this point, continuing therapy is causing Sophie pain without providing benefit." "What are you saying?" Thomas asked, though he already knew. "I'm saying it's time to think about making Sophie comfortable, hospice care, making sure her remaining time is as peaceful and pain-free as possible." Elena stood up abruptly and walked to the window. Outside, people rushed through their lives complaining about traffic and deadlines and what to make for dinner. None of them knew how precious it was, how fragile. "How long?" she asked without turning around. "Weeks, maybe a month if we're fortunate. I'm so sorry." They brought Sophie home 2 days later. Her bedroom had been transformed. A hospital bed replaced her princess bed with the pink canopy. Medical equipment lined the walls, monitoring equipment humming softly. A hospice nurse named Maria would come daily to manage Sophie's pain medication and help with her care. Sophie accepted the changes with the strange grace children sometimes show in the face of the impossible. She didn't ask why she wasn't going back to the hospital. She didn't ask about treatment. On some level, she understood. What she did ask about was the Virgin Mary. "Mama, can we put a picture of her in my room?" Elena found a print online, a reproduction of a classic painting. Mary in blue robes, her hands extended, her face serene and kind. She hung it on the wall opposite Sophie's bed so her daughter could see it easily. Sophie stared at it for hours. Sometimes Elena would hear her daughter talking softly, though she was alone in the room. When Elena asked what she was saying, Sophie would just smile. "I'm asking her to visit me." The days grew shorter. Christmas came and went in a blur of forced smiles and unwrapped presents Sophie was too weak to enjoy. Thomas's parents came. Elena's sister flew in from California. Everyone said goodbye in their own way, though no one used those words. On December 28th, Sophie's breathing changed. Maria, the hospice nurse, recognized the signs immediately. "It won't be long now," she said gently. "A few days at most." That evening, Sophie opened her eyes and looked at her mother with unusual clarity. "Mama, I want to see her on New Year's Eve." "See who, baby?" "The Virgin Mary. I asked her to come then. Will you help me stay awake?" Elena's throat closed. She nodded, unable to speak. "I promise," she finally managed. "I promise, sweetheart." Outside, the world prepared to celebrate a new year, new beginnings, fresh starts. Inside, a mother prepared to help her daughter wait for a miracle. New Year's Eve arrived gray and cold. Snow fell steadily, coating Newton in white silence. Inside the Bennett house, time seemed to move differently, slower, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Sophie had barely been conscious for 2 days. Maria had increased her morphine to keep her comfortable. Dr. Morrison had visited that morning and told Elena and Thomas privately that Sophie likely wouldn't survive the night. Her breathing was shallow and irregular. Her small body seemed to be shutting down, preparing for the end. But as evening approached, something changed. Sophie opened her eyes, not the clouded, not confused gaze of the past weeks, but clear and focused. She looked directly at Elena, who was sitting beside the bed holding her daughter's hand. "Mama, I need to be ready." Elena felt her heart break and mend simultaneously. "Ready for what, baby?" "She's coming tonight, like she promised." Thomas had been dozing in the chair by the window. He jerked awake at Sophie's voice, stronger than it had been in days. He came to the other side of the bed, taking Sophie's other hand. "What do you need, princess?" His voice cracked. "Can you help me sit up? And maybe brush my hair. I want to look nice." Elena and Thomas exchanged glances, tears streaming down both their faces. Elena carefully adjusted the hospital bed while Thomas gently, so gently, brushed Sophie's thin hair. What little remained after the treatments. Maria arrived at 7 o'clock to check Sophie's vitals. She frowned at the monitors, then at Sophie, then at the parents. Her blood pressure has stabilized. Heart rate is stronger. "I don't understand it, but she's holding on." She paused. "It's like she's waiting for something." "She is," Elena said simply. The hours crawled by. Outside, they could hear neighbors gathering for parties, music playing, laughter drifting through the cold air. Inside, the Bennett family kept vigil. Sophie stayed awake, alert in a way she hadn't been for weeks. She asked for water. She asked about the time. She stared at the picture of the Virgin Mary on her wall with an intensity that made Elena's skin prickle. At 11:30, Thomas's mother came to the doorway. "Do you want us to stay, or would you prefer to be alone?" "Stay," Sophie said before her parents could answer. "She won't mind, she loves families." So they gathered. Thomas's parents, Elena's sister, Maria, the hospice nurse, who later admitted she had no medical reason to be there but felt compelled to stay. The clock on Sophie's dresser clicked toward midnight. Outside, they could hear the countdown beginning at a neighbor's house. 10:09:8. Sophie sat up straighter, her eyes fixed on something no one else could see. Her breathing, which had been so labored, suddenly eased. 7:06. 5. "She's here," Sophie whispered. "Mama, she's here." 4:3:2. The room filled with the scent of roses, though there were no flowers anywhere in the house. A warmth spread through the space, inexplicable, gentle, like an embrace. 1. Outside, fireworks exploded. People cheered. A new year began. Inside, something impossible happened. The room grew impossibly warm, and the scent of roses intensified until it was overwhelming. Everyone present later described the same sensation, a presence that filled the space, neither frightening nor intrusive, but undeniably there. Sophie's face transformed. Her eyes, which had been sunken and dull for weeks, suddenly shone with light. She smiled, a real smile, the kind Elena hadn't seen since before the diagnosis. "She's so beautiful," Sophie whispered. Her gaze was fixed on the corner of the room near the picture of Mary. "She's smiling at me." Elena looked desperately at the corner but saw nothing except shadows and the soft glow of the bedside lamp. "What is she doing, baby?" "She's just looking at me, like she knows me, like she's always known me." Sophie's voice was filled with wonder. "She says it's not my time yet." The words hung in the air. Maria, the hospice nurse, moved closer to check Sophie's vitals, her professional training overriding her shock. She stared at the monitor, blinked, and looked again. "Her heart rate is normalizing. Blood pressure is coming up. This doesn't make sense." Sophie continued speaking, her voice growing stronger with each word. "She says Mama and Papa need me still, that I have things to do, that the sickness has to leave now." Elena was sobbing now, not the broken sobs of grief, but something else, something she was afraid to name. Thomas gripped Sophie's hand so tightly he later found bruises on his own palm. Sophie reached out toward the empty corner, her small hand extended. "Thank you," she said clearly. "Thank you for coming." The scent of roses began to fade. The warmth in the room gradually normalized. Sophie's hand dropped back to the bed, and she looked at her parents with tears streaming down her face. "She's gone, but she said everything will be okay now." Sophie fell asleep then, a real sleep, not the morphine-heavy unconsciousness of the past days. Her breathing was deep and even. Maria checked her monitors 3 times, convinced they were malfunctioning. "This isn't possible," she kept whispering. "This isn't medically possible." The family stayed awake all night, afraid to sleep, afraid to believe, afraid that if they looked away, Sophie would slip back into that terrible decline. But dawn came, and Sophie was still breathing steadily. At 8 in the morning, she woke up and asked for breakfast. Real food, not the tiny sips of liquid she'd managed before. Maria called Dr. Morrison immediately. The doctor arrived within the hour, disbelief written across her face. She examined Sophie, ran tests, studied the monitors. "I need to do new scans," she said finally. "Today. Right now." They transported Sophie back to Children's Hospital. The waiting room had never felt so long. Elena paced. Thomas prayed, really prayed for the first time since childhood. Dr. Morrison came out 3 hours later. Her face was pale, her hands shaking slightly as she held the scans. "The tumor," she said slowly, as if she couldn't believe her own words. "It's shrinking, significantly. I've never seen anything like this. Yesterday it was killing her, today it's dying instead." In Boston, in the cold light of a new year, something impossible had become real.